Raw sewage is being poured into Britain's rivers and seas on an industrial scale. Water companies continue to discharge untreated waste while paying out large sums to executives and shareholders. The regulator issues the permits that make much of this possible and takes the money through enforcement deals when things go wrong. Ordinary people who try to clean up polluted waterways risk prosecution and even prison. Children swim in contaminated water and end up violently ill. This is not a series of unfortunate accidents for those companies to turn a blind eye to. It is the predictable result of a system that has prioritised process, profit, and paperwork over clean water and public health for years. England's rivers, lakes, and coastal waters are in a state of managed decline. Privatised water companies discharge untreated or poorly treated sewage for hundreds of thousands of hours every year. Storm overflows that were meant for extreme weather are far more used routinely. High levels of bacteria are repeatedly recorded in places where people swim, paddle, and row. At the same time, the Environmental Agency has threatened volunteers who try to clean up rubbish and sludge from neglected rivers with criminal sanctions. The result is contaminated water, rising reports of illness, and the growing sense that the public is no longer safe in many of its own waterways. This video examines the full picture. It looks at the scale of the sewage discharges, the major criminal case now underway against former Southern Water executives, the case of the barrister who faced threat of prison for cleaning a river, the role of the regulator, the money flows involved, and the real human cost, including children who have become seriously ill after swimming in polluted water. The gap between official statements and lived reality has become impossible to ignore. The scale of the sewage scandal and Southern Water criminal case. Water companies across England and Wales have been releasing untreated or inadequate treated sewage into rivers, lakes, and the sea on a routine basis. Data compiled by campaign groups and analysed by independent researchers show hundreds of thousands of spill hours in recent years. Storm overflows, originally designed for exceptional rainfall, are frequently used in conditions that many experts argue should not have been permitted the discharges under the law. Recent court documents and analysis have raised serious questions about how often these spills actually meet the legal threshold of heavy rain. Companies such as Thames Water and Southern Water appeared repeatedly among the worst performers. High readings of E. coli and other fecal bacteria, which is pretty gross, have been recorded in popular swimming and rowing locations, sometimes dozens of times above the official threshold for poor water quality. During heat waves, when more people enter the water to cool down, the same companies have continued to spill. The physical infrastructure is old and underinvested. Population growth and changing weather patterns have increased pressure on the system, yet for years large amounts of money left to the companies in a form of dividends and executive pay. This is not simply bad luck or a few rogue operators. It is the outcome of the privatised model that allowed value to be extracted while the pipe pumps and treatment works failed to keep pace with reality, combined with regulation that has been too slow and too accommodating. One of the clearest examples of how deep the problem goes is the criminal case now proceeding against former Southern Water executives. On 22nd of July 2026, the High Court cleared the way for Environmental Agency to prosecute 4 former employees, including the company's former chief executive Matthew Wright, along with Philip Barker, Clive Massey, and Mark McGregor. They face a charge of conspiracy to defraud, a common law offence that carries a maximum sentence of 10 years in prison. The allegation is that between January 2012 and December 2017, these individuals conspired to defraud the Environmental Agency and Ofwat by deliberately creating artificial no-flow events at wastewater treatment works. Under the operator's self-monitoring system, the water companies take their own samples. If there is no flow when the sample arrives, no sample is taken and it is not counted as failure. The prosecution says the group arranged for wastewater to be removed by tankers or otherwise stopped the flow on days when a failure was likely, so the sites would appear compliant when they were not. The environmental agency alleges this allowed Southern Water to avoid penalties of around $45 million. The regulators' own assessment put the figure higher. A High Court judge described the allegations of involving carefully planned and extensive fraud and dishonesty at high level within the company and on a large scale, with a view to covering up pollution and deceiving those whose function is to protect the public from such harm. The Southern Water Company itself faces separate charges for breaching environmental permits linked to the same period. 3 further former employees face lesser charges. The company has said the matter relates to historical failures and that is completely different organisation now. The case is proceeding at Medway Magistrates Court. The barrister who cleaned up the river and faced prison time. In early 2026, Barrister Paul Powsland and volunteers from the River Roding Trust spent around 10 days working on the heavily polluted 250-metre stretch of the Elders Brook, a tributary River Roding in East London. The waterway has become choked with rubbish, silt, weeds, discarded applicants, needles, and even weapons. The group hired a digger, removed more than 200 bags of waste, and unblocked the channel. Local people reported that wildlife began to return and stretch of water looked dramatically better. Even someone like with Art of Law, a YouTuber who talks about law, talked about this case and talked about the legal implications of what this barrister did. Shortly after the work was completed, the Environment Agency opened an investigation. Powsland received formal notification that the cleanup had been carried out without required environmental permits. The potential consequences included prosecution, unlimited fines, and a maximum sentence of 2 years in prison. The agency later decided not to pursue a full prosecution and issued a formal warning instead, while making it clear that further unpermitted work could lead to legal action. The contrast could hardly be clearer. Water companies discharge sewage on top on vast scale under permits or with limited and delayed consequences. A group of volunteers who even just tried to remove litter and sludge from the neglected urban river faced the machinery of environmental laws being turned against them. Powsland has pointed out that the Times water sewage outlet sits upstream of the area they restored and continues to discharge. The same regulator that has struggled for years to prevent industrial-scale pollution moved with notable speed when members of the public tried to improve a waterway without the correct paperwork. This is not primarily about protecting the environment, it is about protecting a system of permits, process, and institutional control. The human consequences are no longer abstract. Campaign organisations such as Surfers Against Sewage, which I actually have a t-shirt from them many years ago, have logged thousands of reports of people becoming ill after contact with contaminated water. The most common symptoms include gastroenteritis, vomiting, diarrhea, and infection of the ear, nose and throat. These are consistent with exposure to water polluted by human sewage. Specific recent cases have involved children. In one incident, multiple children who swam in the Dever River shortly after sewage discharge developed severe stomach cramps and projectile vomiting, which is also pretty gross more than the poo. Parents described watching their children become seriously ill after what should have been an ordinary summer activity in the local river. Similar reports have come from other parts of the country wherever sewage spills coincide with warm weather and the public use of water. Officials bathing water classifications and monitoring often lag behind real-time conditions. High E. coli readings continue to appear in rivers and coastal areas used by the public. Even treated wastewater carriers residual contaminants. When treated sewage is added, the risk rises further. The official line is frequently that spills only occur in the exceptional weather or water remains acceptably safe. The experience of families, swimmers, rowers, and local communities increasingly contradicts that reassurance. In too many places, entering the water now carries a genuine and avoidable health risk, especially for children. A system that allows water companies to pollute at a scale that sees former executives face serious criminal charges over alleged test manipulation, and that still threatens volunteers who clear rubbish and sludge, is not serious about environmental protection. It is serious about control, permits, and revenue that flows from the current arrangement. Enforced undertakings and charges paid by water companies generated funds that are directed into restoration projects, but the underlying population continues. The public is left with dirty water and less ability to act. Clean water should be a basic public good. Instead, it has become a contested space between private companies extracting value, a regulator focused on process and income streams, and ordinary people who simply want to restore their local rivers without risking prosecution. The current settlement serves the institutions far better than serving the public. Until the incentives change, the sewage will keep flowing and the threats of volunteers will continue. So anyway guys, hopefully you enjoyed this video about me talking about the sewage problem that we have in the United Kingdom. Now personally, as I mentioned in the video before, I have actually got a t-shirt that is actually to do with Surfers Against Sewage, which one of my mum's friends gave me as a kind of like a spare shirt. And because of this, it makes it a lot more easier for me to understand the sewage problem, especially when it comes on to surfers. And I actually remember when one time I actually met a surfer who was, I guess, in the local area, who did a lot of surfing. Essentially, he would go to a nearby beach, and basically he went and did some sewage, and I actually asked him about this. And he talked about, yeah, there are a lot of polluted rivers and also to do with beachside that have a lot of this pollution. And obviously this is due with maybe the capitalistic greed, especially as I mentioned in last week's video, where I talked about the industrialisation of our food, making us sicker and unhealthier, and also making us a lot more overweight and also causing a lot of health problems. But also to do with the fact that because over-processing and also because, like I said, there's too many people in the country that obviously need to be deported, but it's also causing a lot of health issues, especially to do with sewage. And because of all the pipes are basically not being able to withstand this, because obviously they're not used to having this many people use a toilet, because of this, it makes it a lot more difficult for people to actually be able to go into rivers. And obviously, I remember I actually watched the documentary about this, where essentially it was apparently one of the children even died when they got seriously ill from contaminated water. And obviously I've been doing a lot of research into prepping and making sure that your water is clean enough to drink and make sure there's no nasty metals or any drugs within the water. But because they're so pumped full of fluoride that in my local area I've even checked, I don't think there is any. I think that it's really important to make sure that the health of the people is not like this. And especially when it comes out to community politics, you know, I keep thinking that, am I going to get charged with something? Am I going to, you know, get arrested for doing even something like a basic litter pick? And obviously litter picking isn't really to do with the pollutants, but when it comes down to especially rivers where things are dumped, not just bits of plastic, but also bits of metal and also other things, it really does impact the health of the people and also makes the area look untidy and even something quite similar to India or Africa. And obviously I don't want to rip into them too much in this video, but, you know, if you look at when we have more diversity in the country, especially when I remember going to Birmingham or even somewhere like big cities like Leeds, are just basically trash everywhere. The immigrants basically don't understand the word maintenance, and because of this, they just leave trash everywhere. So you see a combination of the environment being slowly turned into a shithole, not only just through mass migration, but also to do with the fact that, you know, these people cannot comprehend the word maintenance and keep the area tidy. Some of them maybe do, but if you go into a lot of these large areas with a low IQ and low impulse control, not being able to think 15 seconds into the future, it makes it a lot more difficult for these areas to be treated and also be able to look a lot more nicer. It's why white people can actually be able to maintain their areas and make them not look like complete and utter shitholes. And as well, if you want to go and link in the description below with links to my other channels and Discord as well.